Actually going to take a few minutes this morning to give an update to the web-based training program. I want to start with a discussion of some of the history of the web-based training. This goes back to 2014 at the National Equipment Conference, where the group identified a list of potential training topics. In February of 2015, EMTSP made an application with the AASHTO TC3 to host 2 courses on the TC3 website under a scholarship. If you're not familiar with TC3, that's another AASHTO program. That's the Transportation Curriculum Coordination Council. So they host a number of web-based training topics that kind of span the transportation field. In June of that same year, the EMTSP was awarded a scholarship by the TC3. That fall, 2 courses from the list that was put together in 2014 were identified for development of training and approved by the oversight panel. And then in 2016, a second round of potential training topics were solicited. And finally, April of last year, memorandum of understanding was signed between EMTSP and TC3. In that memorandum of understanding, it was written that the EMTSP is the owner of the content that was developed for these classes, so they retain that ownership, but they were allowing TC3 to post those courses on the site. Part of that memorandum is it allows all of the departments access to the content for these classes, regardless of whether you contribute to TC3. There's a lot of states that aren't contributing to TC3 right now, so that doesn't matter for the equipment topics. You're able to go in and access those courses. If you haven't, I would encourage you or your staff to go in and take a look at those. In order to access that, you need to use your official work email. They've got coded in their system at TC3 those domain names, and that's what's granting you access to those classes. So if you try to get in and you have trouble, please let myself or Tim Cunningham or Dennis Halchoff know, and we'll see what we can do to help you. As we mentioned the other day, completed courses. So far we've completed a course on preventive maintenance concepts and a course on benchmarking and best practices. We have 2 other courses that are under development right now. The first is establishing core equipment complements and optimal sizing of state equipment fleets. That course is in final development now. We're completing review by an education committee. Once that's done, the oversight panel will take a final review, and then it'll be sent to TC3 to put on the website. I would imagine that will probably be available towards the end of the year. We're under initial development of the equipment utilization course. Here's a look at a screenshot of what it looks like in TC3. The course is narrated. There are hurdle tests at the end of each chapter so that you can kind of gauge understanding of the material. One thing I'll mention is that these courses, when you go into TC3, they're not organized right now by topic, so there's no way to see the equipment classes separate from all the other content in that site. EMTSP is working with TC3 to see if there's a way to group those somehow so that when you go in, you can pull up the equipment topics, and as more courses are developed, it's easier to find them. But for the time being, you've got to go in there and search by the course name to find it. So just to give a little overview of what's in the courses, starting with preventative maintenance concepts. We talk about basic elements of a preventative maintenance program. And so we're discussing a number of scheduled and proactive activities focused on inspection, maintenance, and repair of equipment to reduce the possibility of a breakdown or accident. So this is to say that it's more than just doing an oil change. It's pulling the wheels off the vehicle, looking at the brakes, it's inspecting the underbody, it's checking for leaks, things of that nature. We talk about advantages and disadvantages of various maintenance models. There's really 4 of those: scheduled preventive maintenance, proactive preventive maintenance, reliability-centered preventive maintenance, and reactive maintenance. We talk about fleet management systems to capture operating data. So whether someone's using a sophisticated software or simple spreadsheet, that people need to be aware of the cost of the systems in upfront costs and time needed to capture the data and what data is being captured, as well as identifying key performance indicators for the program. Finally, we talk about measuring and analyzing PM program performance. The idea here is really no matter how much data you're collecting, it's not of use if it's not analyzed and used to improve the process. Moving forward to our benchmarking class, we talk about fundamental concepts of performance management. This is really understanding what's important to the organization as a whole. A lot of organizations have a strategic plan. That's really the basis of what the organization's trying to do. It's talking to stakeholders that may not be part of the fleet unit and understanding what their needs are. From there, we move into discussing performance metric categories. And in this course, we've defined those as inputs, activities, and outcomes. So the inputs are the labor, the people that work for you, investments you've made in equipment. Activities are the things most of us think of in terms of tasks that these people do day to day. And finally, outcomes, or the impact that the fleet unit is having on others in the organization and how that ties into the overall mission of the agency. And so we talk about identifying appropriate performance metrics for benchmarking. And so we really want to mix in those inputs and activities and outcomes and come up with a group of metrics that we want to benchmark. There's an understanding that we can't go out and benchmark everything. We have to be selective in what we're doing. So we talk about how to identify appropriate metrics and then how to set targets for those metrics. From there, we move into talking about internal and external benchmarking. So comparing different operating units within the agency, as well as maybe other agencies or the private sector. And we talk about what to do with benchmarking data. And this is really using that information you've gathered to inform senior managers, legislators, others, stakeholders about those accomplishments you've made, and it helps support your requests going forward. If it's for more equipment or more resources, you're able to provide objective information on what you're accomplishing. We also talk about the limitations of benchmarking. Some of this data you gather may not be an apples to apples comparison, and it helps you understand how direct is this comparison we're trying to make. And finally, we look at identifying best fleet practices. I want to talk a little bit about course under development now. That's the core equipment complements and optimal sizing of fleets. We start this course out by identifying the right equipment matrix for the intended operation. So this is looking at the equipment types and numbers needed to meet mission critical activities of the agency at a prescribed level of service. From there, we go into talking about developing an equipment condition assessment program. So inspection of equipment to identify repair and maintenance work, system of quantifying remaining service life, prioritizing repairs and cost estimates. We talk about the advantages of leasing, renting, and other alternative sourcing of equipment, understanding that not everything in a fleet needs to be owned, particularly assets that are not part of those core mission activities. We talk about the benefits of rebuilding and retaining long design life heavy-duty equipment. And finally, we move into fleet replacement funding mechanisms. And so we're discussing options such as cash purchase, revolving fund, debt finance, guaranteed buyback, and surplus asset sale proceeds. So looking ahead to the future, shortly after this meeting, we're going to be putting out a call for ideas for beyond these 4 classes that I've talked about. So some of the previously identified topics from 2014 are shown on your screen. We'll be looking at those. We'll be asking for new ideas to see if there's other topics that might be of interest to be developed. We'll look and see if the topics identified here are still relevant. And so this may be a 2-part process where we ask for information on classes, see that these are relevant, and then try to prioritize those. So as we go forward, we'll have an idea of what topics are of the greatest interest. Also want to talk about down the road, once we've developed a set of training courses, what is going to be done with this material. So as it is now, when you go through the TC3 training, you get to the end and you're issued a course certificate for each course that's completed. Is that sufficient to meet the needs of the agencies, or is there something beyond that that would help ensure that people are being adequately trained and retaining that information? I want to talk a little bit about a potential for certification program. If the EMTSP decides that they'd like to consider doing a certification program, if that's decided on, it, the understanding is it's still a voluntary program for each agency. So as a whole, that can be decided on, but it's still left up to each agency if they want to participate. The idea here is the training courses that have already been developed are used as that prerequisite material to sit down and take a written exam. And the ultimate idea here is to ensure that knowledge transfer is taking place and that the employees who are involved in this program possess those desired competencies. So I'm going to take a slide or two here and just draw some parallels to a certification program that's going on in the AASHTO TSP2 program on the pavement side. And that program was initiated in 2016. There's been about 600 people that have participated in that certification program so far. These exams are written exams, in person, closed book, closed note, and they're 50 to 80 question exams with true, false, multiple choice questions. 70% is needed to pass the exam, and so we offer the opportunity to take those exams in person, or they can be proctored through a consortium of college testing centers that are located at universities, colleges, community colleges around the country, so that if you've got an individual that needs to take it, if somebody needs to do a retake, there's an option there to make this easy and accessible to a number of people. So for examinees who pass, they're entered into an online database that's on the TSP2 website, similar to the EMTSP site. Employers can go in there anytime and search who's been certified. There's a copy of those records available. They're also issued a certification card like the one shown on your screen that they can keep with them. The final point I'll make is that certification is valid for a specified period of time. In the case of the TSP2 program, that's 3 years, but if there was a certification program, that's really something that's probably up to EMTSP to decide. If we certified people, how long would that be for? But the idea here is those skills and that knowledge is kept current as things change. People are up to date on the latest practices. Is there any questions?
I know we're putting the trainings out on the TC3 site, but is there any way that, that the states that have their own LMS systems, is there a way to get that training so the states can put the training on their own learning management system so they can actually track people that's taken them and stuff like that?
Is there anybody, Chris, have you done some work on your own with the content that's there?
So we're in the process of working with our Maintenance Training Academy training manager to get that material incorporated into our program so we can do exactly that. And so it is possible to do it, yes.
I should know by now, are these only available to state or, I guess, government agencies, or are?
I believe it falls under the model that TC3 has for any of their other content. I believe there's something that you may be able to access a block number of hours within the system for non-state employees.
You can buy it for 40 hours for X amount of dollars.
I know it's in progress. Would that certification apply to non-government folks as well?
Yeah, we're not currently doing that.
Well, that's, yeah.
I'm just saying, since we aren't currently doing a certification program, anything's possible moving forward if we determine that, and I would certainly assume that would be the case. It wouldn't just be for DOTs.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.